As someone who's tried and tested many methods to reach a C1 level of French in just 3 years, I'm often asked which techniques are most effective and if a certain popular language learning app is worthwhile. I personally didn't use Duolingo to try to learn French because I've heard enough bad things about it to know not to waste my time, but I am familiar enough with it to know why it is not an effective method. Duolingo is essentially a vocabulary game and doesn't do enough to provide context or create simulations that encourage long-term memory, which is essential if you want to be able to apply your skills and communicate in the real world. Of course, Duolingo is convenient and can be fun, but I think there are other techniques that you can start practicing today from home that will actually improve your comprehension and understanding of the new language. Et pour ceux qui sont intéressés, j'ai publié une autre vidéo où je me présente et je parle un peu de mon niveau en français et tu peux trouver le lien dans les commentaires. Now, the Duolingo alternatives that I'll cover in this video are all convenient, most are low cost or even free, and I personally found them to be helpful in my experience learning French quickly. The first method is to watch YouTube videos about your favorite hobbies. If you are already an expert in a specific subject or passionate about something in particular, you can immerse yourself by consuming content about that subject, but in the language that you're trying to practice. On YouTube, you can find content about any subject imaginable. And if you just search using the terms and vocabulary of the target language, it will grant you access to free learning material. But if we're using French as an example, I want to note that I'm not talking about videos on how to speak French. I'm talking about regular content, but from French-speaking content creators. For example, if you're already familiar and passionate about gardening, you can search for content about gardening in French. You can type in astuces jardinage, which is French for gardening tips, and it will show you dozens, if not hundreds of videos. And because you're already interested in gardening, you won't be totally lost when watching the content, even if it's in another language. I think immersing yourself in a subject in which you already have context and reference points is important because your brain will be able to draw a connection between the vocabulary and the situations that you're observing and with memories of things that you've already experienced. And you'll also be more likely to retain what you're consuming because you're already more engaged with the content in the first place. My second tip is to rewatch your favorite movies. This was one of my favorite methods to immerse myself when I was learning Spanish many years ago, and when I was starting to learn French more recently, I found myself watching a lot of animated Disney movies. I chose these movies specifically because I was familiar with the storylines, the concepts were not complicated or difficult to follow, and because I tend to get distracted by live-action movies that are dubbed. But what was important is that I would watch these movies without the subtitles. And I found that the practice really trained my ears to listen for specific details in the conversation, not only in the dialogue and the vocabulary, but also in the inflection and the pace and the rhythm. I know most streaming platforms will allow you to change the language of whatever movie you're watching, but sometimes they can be limited to commonly spoken languages like French or Spanish or German. Another alternative to Duolingo that is much more effective would be to listen to language learning podcasts, which is a passive way to immerse yourself and can make a noticeable difference in improving your comprehension skills. One of my favorite podcasts that I would listen to when starting to learn French was called Little Talk in Slow French, which would discuss topics and current events at a slow, digestible pace, and then it would repeat the whole episode in a normal conversational pace. And this format was super helpful because I was training my ear to listen closely while also learning about topics that I was interested in. And this method is much more effective than simply listening to the radio in another language. If you try to learn by listening to the radio, it could be difficult because the subject matter is random and the pace is hard to follow, and you can't press pause or replay. You may find that you find yourself quickly getting lost as the radio hosts tend to jump from one subject to another, which is a good way to keep native listeners engaged, but it is not at all helpful for people that are trying to learn the language. So, another thing that you can do that's better than Duolingo is to change the language settings on your phone. This is an easy and free way to immerse yourself, and it's effective because you will be forced to familiarize yourself with the terms and vocabulary you need to accomplish everyday tasks. And it may seem strange at first, but you will surprise yourself at how quickly you'll become accustomed to the changes. And by training yourself to successfully manage something in another language, you may also notice a shift in your mindset or a boost in your confidence. I think doing this in a way kind of replicates what it's like to live abroad and to have to navigate simple tasks that had otherwise become thoughtless or second nature in your native language. Now, my next suggestion that's very effective for learning a language is to participate in LINGODA Sprint or Super Sprint. If you love the gamification and the gratification of maintaining a streak on Duolingo, participating in a LINGODA Sprint or a Super Sprint may be the best learning method for you. While it does require a considerable amount of effort compared to the quick and easy vocabulary lessons on Duolingo, the biggest difference is that taking classes on LINGODA will actually teach you the language that you're trying to learn. In fact, LINGODA's live online classes have been one of my favorite methods for learning French quickly. And essentially, their sprint or super sprint is a learning challenge that gives students 50% of their money back in cash or 100% of their money back in the form of credits if they successfully complete the program, which for the sprint, it's 30 classes in 60 days, or for the super sprint, it's 60 classes in 60 days. The rules are a little complex, but the reward is definitely a big motivator. And after the 60-day challenge is over, you will notice a measurable improvement in your skills. I personally loved it, and I'll link my discount code below, which will give you €20 off the cost of your sprint. Now, another option is to try private online tutoring. I personally use Preply, which is a great platform for learning and practicing a language, because you can find a private tutor for any language, at any level, and for any budget. The biggest benefit of using Preply is that it's flexible and that you can sign into your lessons from anywhere in the world. And you can request customized lessons from your tutor to work on exactly what you need help in. I love using Preply for conversational practice, but my teacher is also really great at designing exercises that help me with grammar and pronunciation and comprehension. I've also made another video about my experience using the platform, along with my tips to how to get the most out of your Preply lessons, so I'll link that for you as well. And then my last suggestion, if you want to learn a language more effectively, is to reread your favorite books. I think this method is the most intensive of all the ideas I've mentioned in this video, and I think it's helpful if you already have an intermediate level or even an upper beginner level in the language, but it's really another way to immerse yourself. Similar to what I've described before about rewatching a familiar movie in a new language, rereading your favorite books can help sharpen your comprehension skills, and at the same time it also exposes you to new vocabulary and spelling and sentence structures. And because you already know the storylines and the themes of the books, you're not going to be lost when you're reading them in a new language. In fact, I found that rereading my favorite books in French have also deepened my overall understanding and have allowed me to approach the material from a new perspective. For example, I'm rereading Atomic Habits in French right now. And you can easily find translated copies of most books on Amazon, but if you're not able to, maybe reach out to your local independent bookstore to place an order. So that's my advice. If you're tired of wasting your time with language apps that make big promises but don't help you actually make real improvements in the language, then you can consider any of these methods that I've mentioned and see if you notice a difference. I love sharing my tips for learning languages quickly, and if you're interested in discovering more about my favorite methods and techniques, then check out my other videos. My channel is really about learning new things as an adult and getting out of your comfort zone. So if that sounds like you, then don't forget to subscribe. I wish you the best of luck, and I'll see you next time.